Let's look at our children and listen to them today. Our children who, as Erik Erikson, a refugee from Nazi Germany, said, in each stage of their lives offer a new hope and a new responsibility for all, a vigorous unfolding at each stage of their lives. Children want us, their parents, their friends, their grandparents, their teachers, even their own friends, want us to understand them. And they don't want us to understand them. In part because they may fear what we might learn, in part because they may be ashamed, and in part because they themselves may not know exactly what they are thinking or feeling. So how do we become like mini Sherlock Holmes and become detectives so that not only do we understand what they're trying to tell us, what their wishes and dreams and fears and hopes are, but we may help them understand the same things? Well, one approach we've learned is through their play, through their art, through their stories. Because children's play, art, stories, like dreams, reveal their inner lives and also conceal them. There's a certain disguise in how they're created. Why should we bother to understand them? Well, partly simply because children feel better when they're understood. And partly because the better we understand them, the more they can become the best kind of person they can become, the more satisfied and wiser person, and the more they can give back to society what we've given to them. Why did I get interested in this? I was 17 years old at the University of Chicago over 50 years ago, and I was sitting in a seat someplace over here in the front when one of my teachers, Bruno Bettelheim, was talking about psychoanalysis. And at the end of his very lovely talk, I asked him, I don't really understand what this psychoanalysis is. And he said to me, it's like the voyage between Dante and Virgil, where Virgil, his poet, Dante's beloved poet, takes him on this voyage through his inferno, through his personal hell, in order to achieve a sense of enlightenment, in order to live a better life. And I thought, well, I want to do that. And I decided to do that. But I also decided I wanted to learn from children's own stories what they're trying to tell us. So some 50 years later, I turned to you, and we'll now take a tour through some 6-year-old children's stories and art to see what we learn from them. For instance, this is, I'll call this girl Tali, and she draws this very simple picture, black and white. She could have picked any one of the crayons I had. But listen to the story behind this little girl's eyes. Tali says, Ruti is going to a dancing party. She finished work. She is a piano teacher and a music teacher 5 days a week, but on Friday, she goes to a dancing party. Only if her headmaster, Gil, invites her. Gil is 18 years old, like Ruti is. He's the prime minister's son. He has, like Ruti, he has blue eyes and blonde hair. Now, I look at Ruti at the end of her story, or Tali in this case. She has beautiful dark black eyes and long curly hair past her shoulders, and I say, blue eyes? And she says, come on, she's wearing colored contacts. This gives you a flavor of this girl's inner life, of her present life, and of what past has helped her build up this kind of life. Let's listen to Galit, and we'll hear of a different kind of inner life. Galit draws this simple picture again in pencil she chose, and she says, a girl, and above her the sun. The girl loves clouds and flowers very much. She loves to look at the sun. It's fun for the girl. The sun does not feel good, and we look again and we see in the upper left-hand corner, she's drawn a frown on the sun. She hates that people look at her. The sun is weepy, and because of that, she hates that people look at her. The solution is the sun says, don't look at me. It's not good to play under the sun. The clouds want to hide the sun. The sun doesn't want rain to fall. The sun doesn't want any clouds. The sun says to the girl, I don't want you to look at me. Now, as she draws, there is a dance that went on between us that I wasn't aware of, that one of my students noticed. She draws starting with her head leaning on her left arm, her tongue slightly between her teeth as she concentrates, and I'm leaning on my right arm. We form a V on the table. And as she gets concentrated, I lean back and watch her. And then as she finishes, she starts telling the story, leaning away from me, now sitting up, looking at the picture, leaning towards me, looking more this way, finally touching my shoulder. And she comes to the last line and says, the sun does not like looking at her. That's how we do the work. A few weeks later, I go to this girl's house, and let me tell you the scenario, and you will learn more about her life and who this son is. I walk into the house with my research assistant, who is also Ethiopian from the same town. And when the mother opens the door, I'm a bit shocked to see that it looks like the mother's wearing a barbed wire choker. And when I look again, I see there are small crosses tattooed into her neck. Rows of them. A cross tattooed in her forehead. A cross tattooed on her cheekbones and on the back of her hands. We come and sit down and she tells us her life story, which I'll only abbreviate to one section here. She grew up in a little village that was all Jewish until she was 15. And then through the village came a man from another village who thought she was beautiful. So he kidnapped her and took her away and kept her captive, he and her family, for 3.5 years. She got pregnant, had her first child. And every day of her captivity, the man's mother tattooed a cross in this woman's skin so that she would become Christian. And after 3.5 years, one night she escaped through the window of the hovel and walked back to her home several days away with her baby on her back, and she got there and found everybody had left. The Jewish agency had taken them to Israel, and she went to the Jewish agency and they reunited her with her family, and then she remarried and had several more children, including Galit, who drew this picture. When Galit comes home after we've interviewed the mother, she and her siblings burst into the apartment and get treats and bring them to us to eat. And as Galit runs behind her mother's chair, she wipes her hand across her mother's forehead. And mother says right away, she doesn't like that I have crosses here. Let's turn to Donnie's story and picture. Donnie says, the butterflies want a house, and find it here. Under the house are flowers. The house floats on flowers. It's a regular house, he says to me. Now, when children say regular, I right away think there's something irregular going on. That's the suspicious me. He says, it's got a red roof with lines. And when a child talks about a roof from years of work, we suspect he's talking about something going on in his head. And when he draws a chimney with smoke coming out, there's something important going on in his head. So let's listen. The butterflies fly over the house. They can't live in the home. They can't live together. And we see that even though those two beautiful butterflies, the red and the blue, the father and the mother, can't live together, he wants them together. He is the house that holds them together. For this picture, I'm going to ask you to use your imagination for a moment and erase all the black and the purple, which she drew after she had finished the picture. Just erase the black and big purple raindrops. And this girl draws this picture before we see the black and purple, and she tells this story. She says it's a beautiful house in a forest that a father built, and he decorated the house. You can see the decorations. And he decorated the forest too. And I thought that was the end of the story. I waited. And she says, I forgot something. And she grabs the black and purple crayon, and she draws purple gobs of rain coming from black clouds and scribbles the black. And she said, and then a storm came and destroyed everything, the 6-year-old girl said. To show you how important this story is to her, several months later, I go home to visit with her parents, to interview them, and she greets me and she said, do you have, while I'm talking with her parents, do you have paper and crayon that I can draw with? And in my briefcase, I carry that. And she went off for the next half hour. And at the end of that time, after talking with her parents, she comes back with a whole set of pictures that are like this, sometimes with black storms, sometimes with black crows, beautiful scenarios into which disaster invades. Remember, we want to examine the possibilities for a new hope and a sense of responsibility of how do we change the memories of disaster into a future that's more hopeful. Let's look at one more picture before we stop. Tina draws this. I'd seen her draw pictures of people already, and then I said, draw a picture of your family doing something. And she carefully first says to me, I love my family, writes on top of the page, I love my family, and then draws this. And she's very careful to explain this to me, to tell me a story, that there's 2 dark purple balls at 12 and 3. There's 2 light purple balls at 6 and 9. And then she draws lines. Each line connects a dark with a light ball. A dark with a light ball. The yellow from 12 to 6. A line from 12 to 9. From 9 to 3, from 3 to 6. And then she puts down her crayon. I ask her, well, tell me a story about this. And she says, the lines keep the balls from touching, because if they touch, they will explode themselves. And I ask her, who are the lines in your family? And she says quietly, I am. And then we talk about what a big responsibility that is for a 6-year-old to keep everyone apart. And yet at the same time, these lines hold this family together. That's a big responsibility. This is Tina's view of her present. This is based on Tina's past. And if we think about what Erickson said to us in the beginning, how do we help her develop a future which isn't so full of tension, which isn't full of the threat of explosion? And this is our sense of responsibility and our hope for all. Thank you.